We got a little bit more clarity on the Jake Guentzel situation from Kyle Dubas on Wednesday. Hunter and I are going to discuss that and much more on this edition of the Locked On Penguins podcast.
You're Locked On Penguins, your daily podcast on the Pittsburgh Penguins, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Welcome back, Penguins fans, to another edition of the Locked On Penguins podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Patrick Damp, joined as always by the one and only, the all-star himself, Hunter Hodes. We thank you for making this your first listen/watch of the day because we're your team every day. We are free and available on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. And today's episode is brought to you by Jace Medical. Empower yourself when you purchase a Jace case, providing you with a personal supply of 5 antibiotics that treat 50-plus infections. Get yours today at jacemedical.com and use code LOCKEDON to get $20 off your order. That's JASEmedical.com. So, as I said at the top of the show, yesterday we got a little bit more clarity from President of Hockey Operations and General Manager Kyle Dubas about everything surrounding Jake Guentzel. Now, you and I have kind of been on the train of there's no need to trade Jake Guentzel. They're in a playoff race. We'll talk about everything surrounding it as well. But Dubas basically confirmed what a lot of us had been thinking over the past couple of weeks as the trade talk surrounding Jake Guentzel going into unrestricted free agency has been kicking up. Dubas basically said that it's all speculation. He has not talked to any teams about Jake Guentzel. He has not engaged really in any sort of discussions about or surrounding Jake Guentzel, including his contract. And he essentially said what he said about this team as a whole about a month and a half ago when he said, I'm going to look at this after the All-Star break, just like I am with the rest of this team, and whether or not they're going to be buyers or sellers come the deadline or however they're going to approach the rest of the season. And hearing that from Kyle Dubas is encouraging to me because Jake Guentzel is Jake Guentzel. He is one of the best wingers to come through the Penguins organization in the last, 20, 30 years in that time frame. He's definitely the best winger that Sidney Crosby has ever had outside of Marian Hossa, who they couldn't hold on to after the 2008 run to the Stanley Cup final. And the East is wide open right now, and the Penguins are in the thick of a playoff race. As we record this on Thursday afternoon, the Penguins are still just 1 point out of a wild card spot and only a handful of points out of third in the Metropolitan Division. So if your goal, and it appears to be, is to make the playoffs again, unless you get an absolute Godfather offer they cannot refuse for Jake Guentzel, you don't get rid of Jake Guentzel. So what say you, Hunter?
And you're right. They're not going to get that ridiculous offer for Jake Guentzel. This is a player who is going to be an unrestricted free agent at the end of the season. You've seen that type of deal so many times before, right? Usually it involves A, first-round pick, B, some sort of prospect, whether it's a A-level prospect or a B-level prospect, and C, sometimes at least, a roster player coming back that's not nearly as good as the player that is going out. Now, I've seen some takes from other fan bases saying, oh, we're going to get this guy for pennies on the dollar if he comes on the market. That's not true. I've also seen some takes from fans in the Penguins fan base that think you're just going to get some godlike return. That's not true either. What you're going to get is a very fine return, but it's not really going to set you up for, I guess, maybe a lot of success next year and the year after. Sure, having the first round pick is cool, but I don't really care about that right now, considering that this team is still in a win now mode. Cool, you get maybe a decent prospect back that's 2 to 3 years away, but I don't care about that right now. And then as for the player, potential roster player that would come back, the player wouldn't be nearly as good as Jake Guentzel. And oh yeah, you don't have Jake Guentzel anymore. I'll continue to say this. I really don't think he is going to get dealt unless the team is way out of the playoff race. And with the way they've been able to claw their way back into it, they're 10-3 in their last 16 games. I think they will be on the playoff bubble, excuse me, by the time the trade deadline comes around in early March. There's 4 games until the All-Star break right now. That's where Dubas has kind of said he's going to really evaluate this team. If they can go, 3-1 during this stretch, and that's possible considering the teams that they play. Vegas is banged up. Arizona is all right, but that's a beatable team. You have Florida coming to town, which is going to be, I think, the hardest of those 4. Then Montreal the next night. If you can win 3 of those 4 or go 2-1-1, I still think Dubas will be feeling pretty good about this team going into the All-Star break, heading into February, where, again, the schedule is a little spread out a little bit. And I'll say this too. Even if the two sides have a conversation over the All-Star break where maybe Jake goes, for example, hey, I'm not really ready to talk about an extension right now. Why don't we punt this until, after the season? Even with that, I still think Kyle will lean to keep Guentzel because, again, if you're in the race, there's no reason to trade him no matter what. Now, if he does say, hey, I'm not going to sign no matter what, maybe that changes things, a little bit, but I don't think he's going to say that when these two sides reconvene after the All-Star break, February, whatever they do. I just don't see a world right now where it makes sense. And then you have the Sidney Crosby angle too. Telling Sidney Crosby that, oh yeah, we're going to trade your best winger when you're in the middle of a playoff race trying to get back into the tournament. I mean, what is he going to think about that? He's going to be upset. And I think every player of the core, or every top player, I should say, on this team is going to be upset. So again, just for all those reasons, I really can't see it happening right now.
No, I agree with pretty much everything you said. And let's also keep this in mind too, going into next season. As it stands right now, the Penguins have $18 million in cap space going into this offseason. And yet the only big free agent they have on the books is Jake. That's it. Everybody else is either locked up or the people that are walking aren't that big of a deal.
Right.
And even the RFAs that you have are not that going to be that hard to negotiate with. It's POJ, who we don't even know if they'll tender him because of the way he's played this year. I imagine they will, just to be safe, because you don't want to lose him for nothing. And maybe he does turn into something, but we'll see. Valtteri Pustinen's an RFA. He's been fine, but he hasn't become a regular NHLer yet. And then you have Alex Nedeljkovic as a UFA, which he's probably going to go get starter money if this keeps up the way it's going. And then that's really it. And then you look down at the minors, and a lot of the guys who are RFAs, Sam Poulin, still don't know what he is. Jonathan Gruden, okay, maybe he turns into something. Alex Nylander, he's 25. It's almost time for him to decide if he's an AHLer or an NHLer.
You know what he is, I think, at this point, to be honest.
Yeah. And then you also look at next year's UFA class, this summer's UFA class. It's not exactly star-studded. And people will say, like, okay, maybe you got Sam Reinhart out there. You've got Tyler Myers. You've got Adam Henrique, Anthony Mantha. There's not a ton of people out there who are really going to be worth going after. I mean, 34-year-old Steven Stamkos right now is the most notable person on the market.
I'm sorry,
and you're probably
Tyler Myers, and I laughed in my head there. That was hilarious.
But that's the thing, though, is you look at the UFAs coming up this summer. Outside of Jake, there's not many.
No,
and it's not a market where you're going to have guys that are going to be competing to get bigger deals. So if you're the Penguins at this point, you probably re-sign him, and it's going to cost you some money. But and here's the other thing. I think Jake Guentzel's proven that he is a very good goal scorer in the National Hockey League, one of the better ones in the National Hockey League. And if you dig into his stats, which these are just the stats that us lay people have, we're not in front offices, we're not in the NHL. He has better production away from Sid, and he does more to set Sid up than Sid does to set him up. So the whole narrative that he's a product of Crosby and Crosby alone is BS. So if you sign him to a longer-term deal and then you start realizing, oh, man, it's time to rebuild in Pittsburgh, you can send him off to a team that's in the middle of contending in 3-4 years and get a nice return for him, get a nice prospect, get a haul of picks, maybe get a player that can fill a roster spot while you're trying to tank for whatever big pick you're going for. So it's not a bad situation to be in. And I don't think letting him walk is the right idea here.
No, I don't think so either. And you've seen Dubas say, or you've heard him say, excuse me, that he has a good relationship with Guentzel's agent. So I think the discussions are probably going to be fine. Maybe that little bit of that is copium. Sometimes discussions with agents and managers get a little ugly, but with how Dubas's relationship appears to be with Guentzel's agent, it looks to be fine. And again, I'm sure they're going to have discussions after the All-Star break, and assuming they go well, which hopefully they do, they'll maybe be making progress on a long-term extension. Now, what does that look like? Maybe 8 times 8.5, 8 times 9. It's going to be somewhere in that area. I don't personally think he gets 8 times 10. I think that's a little rich for Guentzel, in my opinion, but somewhere in that 8 to 9 million range is probably the sweet spot for him. And you're right. The people that think he's a product of Sidney Crosby, they don't know what they're talking about. He has great numbers with Evgeny Malkin, just like he does with Sidney Crosby. And when he gets hopefully selected to Team USA, whether it's the World Cup of Hockey in a couple of years, or hopefully this league tries to go back to the Olympics, because I would love to see Olympic hockey again for the first time in quite a while, and he gets selected to that, people will see just how good he is away from Sidney Crosby there too.
And also keep in mind this, it's a joke and a meme and a cliche. Pro hockey players hate moving their stuff, man. They really do. And so there's a good chance that I'm used to Pittsburgh and I've been playing here my whole career. I'm just going to stick right here while I can. And we've seen that trend a lot throughout the league. And lastly, we can keep this in mind too. Kyle Dubas, when he was in Toronto, everybody complains that, oh, he lost those negotiations with the core up there. But if you look at the contracts he signed those guys to, they weren't rich in actual dollars that you had to pay out to these guys. You had to pay those guys on July 1st because they all signed these contracts with ginormous signing bonuses, and their actual salary was not that bad. So if you get to the point in 4 or 5-ish years with Jake Guentzel where you maybe want to get rid of him, they're not going to have to pay the team that he gets sent to a ton of actual dollars. You have to pay him in signing bonuses most likely, but actual dollars won't be that bad.
Agreed. And another thing for just the trade stuff for this year, there's always a chance that the Penguins, or just any team that makes a trade, you retain on a player, right, to make it work for the other team. If the Penguins end up retaining there, then that return goes down a little bit even more. So again, I just don't really see too many positives to moving on from, especially in the situation where the Penguins are right now, where they're fighting for their lives. And hopefully by the time the deadline comes around, they are firmly entrenched in a playoff spot.
And speaking of someone who is really helping them get back to the playoffs, that is our captain, Sidney Crosby. And we're going to talk about a little something with him here in the next segment about how he has been a little bit disrespected by some of our colleagues. But first, we have to tell you about our sponsor, and that is Jace Medical. I know we come to sports to escape from some of the crazy realities of real life, but can we talk about, for just a minute, preparing for real life? According to the FDA, pharmacies are running out of antibiotics like amoxicillin right in the middle of one of the worst flu seasons in over a decade, and that is scary. I can't imagine a more helpless feeling than if my significant other or one of my loved ones got sick while a supply chain issue kept them from life-saving medication that they needed. Thankfully, we'll be okay because of Jace Medical. The Jace case is a pack of 5 different antibiotics to treat a long list of bacterial illnesses, including UTIs, respiratory infections, sinusitis, skin infections, among others, and this stuff could happen to any of us. Visit jacemedical.com and complete your physician encounter, and it will be reviewed by a board-certified physician, and your medications will be dispensed by a licensed pharmacy at a fraction of the regular cost. It's never been more important to be prepared than today, so go to jacemedical.com and use offer code LOCKEDON to get $20 off of your order. Okay, we're back here on this edition of the Locked On Penguins podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Patrick Damp, joined as always by the all-star himself, Hunter Hodes. And, we got to go a little cliche sports talk radio here, but we just have to do it because we have been presented with a power ranking from some of our Locked On NHL friends across the company here. They had to do their we did our mid-season power rankings for the top 10 Hart Trophy candidates, however you want to phrase that. And we're going to put this up here on the screen right now. So take a look if you're watching on YouTube. This is the Locked On NHL Power Rankings of Hart Trophy candidates. For those of you that are listening, 1, 2, and 3, Nathan MacKinnon from the Colorado Avalanche, Nikita Kucherov from the Tampa Bay Lightning, and Connor McDavid at number 3 from the Edmonton Oilers. Now, for those of you who are watching on YouTube, you can see very clearly sitting at number 9 is Sidney Crosby. Now, let's go through a couple of the players here, again, for those who are listening, who are ranked ahead of him. At 4, we have Quinn Hughes of the Vancouver Canucks. At 5, we have Elias Pettersson from the Vancouver Canucks as well. At 6, we've got Connor Hellebuck, goaltender for the Winnipeg Jets. At number 7, Cale Makar, defenseman for the Colorado Avalanche. And at number 8, Artemi Panarin, forward for the New York Rangers. Hunter, I am going to give you the floor because I know you've got some takes on this, my friend.
This is a sham. It's a total farce, people. But in all seriousness, having Sidney Crosby on there is great, but at number 9, really, I mean, with what he has done this season, he should be in the top 5, in my opinion. And I know he may not have the points that some of these other players have, but he does have 26 goals at the halfway point of the season. He's on pace for over 50 goals right now, which would be the most goals he scored since the 2009-2010 season when he did score 50 that year. But he is the main reason why the Penguins are on the playoff bubble right now. This team goes as Sidney Crosby goes. And if we're talking about this award overall, it's not all about points. It's about most valuable player to your team. And right now, Sidney Crosby deserves to be top 5 in this list of players. It's funny. I host the Locked On NHL national show with Nick Zararis on Thursdays, and we discuss these rankings in detail. I put out my top 5 ballot this morning. I can throw it out here for you as well, Pat. At number 1, I actually had Nikita Kucherov winning it, not because he has the most points, but because he has been most valuable to his team this year. I think if the Lightning don't have his services this year, they're not even close to being in the playoff bubble right now. After that, I would have Nathan MacKinnon. Sidney Crosby would round out my top 3. Honestly, you can interchange those two, but I have Sidney Crosby as a finalist and in that top 5. And then I have Connor McDavid and Elias Pettersson to round out my top 5. That would be my ballot if I had to submit one today. I don't think McDavid should be in the top 3 right now. I understand he's always going to be in the conversation because he's the best player in the world, but with what these other players have been doing, for example, Kucherov with the season he's having, McKinnon, you have Sid, you have Quinn Hughes and Pettersson, who have both been ridiculous for the Canucks this season. I would have McDavid a little further down that list and not even have him as a finalist for right now. But for what Sidney Crosby has done overall, it's insane that he is not top 5 on this list. He deserves to be in serious consideration for the Hart Trophy. Again, I'm not saying he's going to win it, but he should at the very least be in the top 5 of everyone's ballot, if not a finalist for this award, because he has been doing it all over the ice for this team this season, and it's been tremendous to watch. And I know there's a lot of great candidates for this award, but you're telling me Sid's number 9 on this list? Come on. That's a little ridiculous to me.
Yeah, that's a tad absurd. And the thing I'll say about this, I will, before I get into the reaction to it, is I know I don't know if it's still going on, but I know it was for a little while. ESPN had an ad campaign that was hockey's new golden age. And I think they're spot on about that. There is so much talent in this league now. Like, I don't ever remember there being this much top tier talent in the National Hockey League. So when I look at this top 10 here, I don't think there's anybody undeserving to be in it except for maybe Panarin. Like, I know he's having a great year, and I'm not dissing our pals over at Locked On Rangers. I just think it's one of those.
Panarin should be on there, I would say. I would only remove one player for David Pastrnak because he's been ridiculous for the Bruins yet again this year, and that team has not much center depth, to be honest.
Yeah, and you beat me to that. That's what I was going to say. Yeah. I would probably swap out Panarin in for Pastrnak just because how good he's been. I am very similar to you for my top 3 where I too have a vote for this. My number 1 would in fact be Kucherov. You already said it. Without him, the Lightning are probably not even in a playoff spot at this point, let alone fighting to get into a top 3 spot in the Atlantic. I would move Nathan McKinnon out of the top 3 in place of Crosby. I would probably have Connor McDavid at 2, or I would have Quinn Hughes at number 2, just because on a Vancouver Canucks team that has surprised everybody, he has been the driving force behind it. And then 3 and 4 for me would be Crosby and McDavid. McDavid, because even through a rash of early injuries, he has been dominant and been great for that Oilers team, especially in this resurgence. And then same thing for Sid that we kind of said about Kucherov. Without Sidney Crosby, this team is not fighting for a playoff spot. They are not only in the basement of the Metropolitan Division, they might even be in the basement of the Eastern Conference.
Yeah, they're a bottom 10 team in the league if he is not playing like this year. I'm not going to go as far as to say they will be a lottery team considering the amount of talent that is on this team, but I think they will be a bottom 10 team overall if Sid was not doing this. And yeah, I could definitely be talked into putting Quinn Hughes over Pettersson on my ballot just because both have been ridiculous this year. I mean, Quinn Hughes is showing everyone, I think, why he's a top 5 defenseman in the league. And Pettersson, I had him on there just because I think people have finally realized just how good he is and how, I mean, he's going to be making quite a bit of money for a long time after this season. I think, honestly, it's been him and Hughes that have been the driving force for Vancouver's success this year. You could argue either one of them. It was kind of almost a coin flip for me, but definitely hear what you're saying on that.
And if I don't take Panarin off for Pasternak, I probably take Hellebuck off for Pasternak. It's really hard for me to put a goalie in the Hart Trophy conversation simply because it's way more of a individual position than everything else. And they have the Vezina, and honestly, I don't know if I would say even Connor Hellebuck has been the best goalie in the league this year. I would probably give that to Thatcher Demko of the Vancouver Canucks.
It's close. I would probably lean towards Hellebuck for the Vezina right now, but it's a pretty close race between him and Demko overall. You know, you have Ingram in Arizona, who's been awesome as well. You know, Swayman in Boston, Allmark too. There's going to be, the Vezina race should be pretty intriguing this year as well. And I'm sure, you know, the usuals, Shesterkin and Sorokin will probably wake up in the second half of the season as well. You know that they're probably going to, at least, but
and with the second half of the season right here on the horizon, we are going to talk about that in our final segment and what the Penguins should be targeting once they get to the trade deadline, should they remain in the playoff race. We'll talk about that right after this. But first, we have to tell you about our next sponsor, and that is Indeed. We're driven by the search for better. But when it comes to hiring, the best way to search for a candidate isn't to search at all. Don't search, match with Indeed. If you need to hire, you need Indeed. Indeed is your matching and hiring platform with over 350 million global monthly visitors, according to Indeed data, and a matching engine that helps you find quality candidates fast. Ditch the busy work. Use Indeed for scheduling, screening, and messaging so you can connect with candidates faster. And Indeed doesn't just help you hire faster. 93% of employers agree Indeed delivers the highest quality matches compared to other job sites. One of the things that I have said on this show anytime I have to do the Indeed read is that it helped me when I was unemployed. It helped me connect with a bunch of great companies that I was suited to work for. So it really helped me in my job search. And listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/lockedon. Just go to Indeed.com/lockedon right now and support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Indeed.com/lockedon. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire? You need Indeed. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to the Thursday edition of the Locked On Penguins podcast. One more time, I'm one of your hosts, Patrick Damp, joined as always by the illustrious Hunter Hodes, and we're going to do a little bit of trade talk here as we get closer to the second half of the NHL season for our Pittsburgh Penguins. And this isn't so much we're going to name names or talk about candidates or put our ideas into the NHL 24 trade proposal in franchise mode kind of segment, but we're going to talk more about the state of the Penguins and what their needs are. So one thing we know for sure, what they're not going to need at the deadline, barring any kind of injury, they're not going to need goaltending. They're good. They're good in net. Tristan Jarry, Alex Nedeljkovic, both looking good. Both look like viable candidates to possibly take a nice amount of starts as we get into the back half of the season. So that leaves forward and defense. And Hunter, I know you and I may differ on this one, so let you have the reins on this one. Defense or forward, who should they be targeting?
So, of course, this all assumes the Penguins will buy at the deadline, and based on where they are in the playoff race right now and what Kyle Dubas has been saying, I do think they are going to be buyers, or there's a better chance they will be buyers compared to sellers. At least that's how I see it. And if they do buy, it's close. I kind of see it as a 1A, 1B situation. I'm going to go forward at the 1A spot, but just by a smidge. And I say that because while, yes, this team does need another defenseman to round out this group, I think they need another forward for the bottom six even more. Whether that's a third line center or whether that's a winger to put on that line, that provides more of a scoring touch. When you look at the bottom six right now, Drew O'Connor, he's been tremendous these last few weeks. He's been their best point producer down there, at least these last few weeks. He's been great. Lars Eller, he's been really good all season. A lot of his impacts have come in the defensive zone, but he has been able to provide at least some offense down there. Jeff Carter at times, he's been able to provide some offense and score a couple of clutch goals for the Penguins. Outside of that, Jansen Harkins, okay, fine. But if I'm talking about a playoff roster, I don't really want him as my 11th or 12th forward, in my opinion. I would rather have him as like my 13th forward. That's how I see it. Matt Nieto, we'll have to see whenever he comes back. It'll be interesting to see if he gets back in line, considering the competition for those spots right now. But I still think this bottom six needs one more good goal scorer that can score on nights where the top players on this team just don't have it. Now, that said, this team also does need a defenseman. And that's where this is going to be, I think, a little bit tricky to get both, because this team doesn't have a lot of assets, right? They also don't have a lot of cap space right now. That's the two big things that are really putting like the hamper on getting both of these at the deadline. You're going to have to go dollar in, dollar out for at least one move, if not two, if you want to do both. But for a defenseman, you are set at the top with your three: Erik Karlsson, Chris Letang, and Marcus Pettersson. But I still think they need another difference maker. Now, who that is, I don't know, but I still think they need another guy to round out that group that could potentially play with Karlsson or Letang on the left side, because, we wanted it to be Ryan Graves. He's been a bit disappointing. P.O. Joseph, in a perfect world, he would have been locking down that third line or third pairing spot, I should say, with Ruedel or whoever they wanted to put there. But he hasn't been able to do that. I think when John Ludwig is ready to come back, he might be taking POJ's spot again. But overall, I do think they need another defenseman, but I just wouldn't have it at my 1A spot, I think.
See, I kind of disagree. I mean, I'm in the same headspace as you, where I think it's not it's a very close competition of what they need more of. They definitely need more production out of the bottom six if they want to go far. However, the thing for me this time of the year is that you look at the defensemen, and what the bottom six is here with the Penguins. They're going to chip in from time to time. It should be more, but they're still going to chip in from time to time. They are a lot better supplementary players than they were last season. Then you look at the defense, and it's a lot of question marks. Ryan Graves has been hugely disappointing. We were looking for a very solid top four this year of some combination of Graves, Letang, Karlsson, Pettersson, and Graves being a disappointment has thrown that into flux. P.O. Joseph has been another disappointment. I don't think he's been horrendous, but like you said, we wanted him to lock down that spot on the third pair and make it his, and he simply has not been able to. Ryan Shea is an unknown. He's been fine enough. Maybe he becomes something, but right now it's not looking like he's going to be anything overly special. I like John Ludwig. I think he brings a physical presence this team has missed, but unfortunately, he has not been able to stay healthy. The first time, freak accident, rarely ever see that happen. And then he comes back and gets hurt again. So there's a lot of question marks on this defense right now. Like Chad Ruedel, but like you said, 6th or 7th defenseman. And that's all he is. And where this defense is right now, the 6th, 7th D-man in Chad Ruedel is basically a luxury you want to have when you have more solidified players. Now, here's where our entire discussion might be rendered moot. It is going to be a seller's market this year going to the trade deadline, because as we record this here on Thursday afternoon, There are 9 teams within 5 points of a playoff spot right now. And there are only 7 teams 5 or more points out of a playoff spot. So right now, everybody thinks they're in it. Everybody thinks that they are going to make the playoffs. So everybody's going to be looking to add. And that puts your Chicago Blackhawks, San Jose Sharks, Columbus Blue Jackets in a position where they can sit there and hold out because everybody's got a bid for what they want. So it's going to be really hard for the Penguins right now, who are both up against the cap and don't have a lot to move. In spare me your takes, compliment section and tweets. No, this doesn't mean you move Jake Guentzel because of that.
No.
You have to keep Jake Guentzel to keep this playoff push going. So it's going to be really difficult for the Penguins to find something. All that said, I like who they have in their front office with Kyle Dubas. He has shown a willingness to get creative. He has shown a willingness to communicate with other general managers. And there is a real chance he is going to do something we aren't going to expect coming up to the deadline, because he has often pulled those kind of moves in his time in Toronto.
Right. And we'll have more targets at some point here in detail. I mean, we're only at January 18th right now. The trade deadline is not until early March. So we'll start zeroing in on some trade targets for both forward and defenseman at some point. If I wanted to throw a forward out there for my 1A situation, I think Anthony Duclair from the Sharks makes all the sense in the world. If you wanted to add someone to your bottom 6 who can drive play, score a little bit, he would be up there as one of my top targets. In my opinion,
I'd take Duclair in a heartbeat, man. I've wanted that dude for years.
He would be a good fit for this team. And I know you put Monahan out there for a forward. Defenseman wise, I would have to see. I don't really have too many targets at the top of my list right now. And there's also, I don't think, too many defensemen on the market right now also. So we'll have to see what happens with the situation. This will be good to revisit, Pat, say early to mid-February, where some teams that feel like are in it right now maybe take a step back and like, oh, we might have to start thinking about selling. But I agree. I think Dubas, he has shown an ability to be aggressive during his time as a general manager in Toronto. Remember, he made quite a few trades during the up to the deadline, I should say, last year with Maple Leafs. Would not be surprised if he decides to do that here with the Penguins either, even though they don't have too many assets or be that much cap space. But he can, as you said, he can get creative if he wants to.
He's very good at hockey trades. And I know everybody rolls their eyes at that phrase. It literally means a trade where there is not a clear buyer or clear seller. It's two teams that have similar needs and you just meet them, to where you're not just picking up a pending UFA and trading off picks and prospects. It's where maybe you move a player or two off your roster that another team running to the playoffs might need, and they give you a player or two that you need to fill in for your run to the playoffs. So we will see what he does. I am very interested to see, because this team has been trending upward the last month, and they're putting themselves in a good position to Kyle Dubas to make a move for a push to the playoffs. But that's going to do it for the Thursday edition of the Locked On Penguins podcast. We will be back tomorrow to preview the Saturday night game against the Vegas Golden Knights and talk about some other news of the day. But until then, for Hunter Hodes, I am Patrick Damp. Thank you for tuning in to the Locked On Penguins podcast, and we will talk to you tomorrow.